the other night I had a chance to finish the Spider-Man Noir series. Binge the show in about 2 days. Not a joke, not something I usually do, but in this case, I thought it was a perfect excuse. I am going to go into some spoilers about the show, so if you haven't seen it, ye be warned. But the show is about a private investigator named Ben Reilly, also known as the Spider, or Spider-Man in this particular timeline, if Spider-Man were to exist in a 1930s setting, dealing with certain traumas from his past and how he's eventually coming out of retirement when a certain case pops up where there's all this interconnectivity between him and a few other people that are thrown into the mix. The Spider-Man Noir portrayal has been around for about 16, 17 years, something like that. It started in February of 2009, the year I actually graduated high school. But my first exposure to it was the Shattered Dimensions video game from 2010. That was probably my favorite aspect of the whole game because the 1930s, 40s, and even 1920 setting, dare I say it, that's probably my favorite historical time period. Both sets of my grandparents were born in the 1930s, and my dad's parents in particular were big fans of Frank Sinatra and a bunch of other people that were famous in the music industry during that time. So there's some sort of, I guess, spiritual familial connection that I feel towards that era. Now, as opposed to Peter Benjamin Parker, as he's called in the Spider-Noir universe, his alter ego is Ben Reilly. My apologies, I had to change the camera because the angle was slightly off. But for anyone who doesn't know, Ben Reilly was originally the Scarlet Spider in Marvel Comics. He was one of the clones of Peter Parker from the Clone Saga in the 90s. I have heard a person or two saying they don't like the name change. Personally, I'm not bothered by that because with all the other stuff that they throw in here, it's a very unique look at the Spider-Man character. Not just with the 1930s setting and the type of criminals that he's fighting. I mean, we have seen Spider-Man in various iterations take on an organized crime element, whether it's like video games or comics, but in movies or television, not so much. And Spider-Man in this one is an aging Spider-Man, someone who's about maybe 60 years old. I can't remember offhand if they address how old he is. It's safe to say this guy's not getting any younger. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but this show was really impressive in my book. This is an adaptation of a comic book property, so in that way it's not new. In comparison to the other cinematic experiences we've had with Spider-Man, from the live action films, the animated stuff, this is a very refreshing tale. As I mentioned earlier with the character's age, I personally have been wanting to see Spider-Man as a full-grown adult, maybe older than he usually is portrayed, because most of the time we see him either in college or high school, and after a while it just gets really tiring. Up until recent years, the closest that we ever saw to an adult Spider-Man was Tobey Maguire in Spider-Man 2. And then when he showed up in No Way Home a few years ago, he was about maybe mid to late 40s, even though it was a special appearance, it was still an aging Spider-Man, so it was like our first taste of what it would be like for Spider-Man if he was much older than when he actually started out. At least with the live action side of things, because we also saw that in the Spider-Verse movie from 2018. But in a live action lens, this is the first time that we've seen an aging Spider-Man, played by none other than Nicolas Cage himself. I don't think I've ever really talked about Nicolas Cage. I would not call myself a fan. I don't dislike the guy. I think in some other movies I've seen him in, he's actually quite good. And I guess I could see how and why people are drawn to him. A big thing is the classic Nicolas Cage freakouts, which he does have at least one in here when he goes up against those guys in the bar, which then he gets plastered. And he's actually quite good as the character. He voiced Spider-Man Noir in the 2018 Spider-Verse movie. Sidebar, I'll never forget my reaction when I heard that voice. I thought, what? Which I guess now in hindsight is Hollywood warming audiences up to the idea of Nicolas Cage being a spider person. He at one point was going to be Superman back in the 90s. He was Ghost Rider. But I guess you can always count on Spider-Man and responsibility. But in this case, no power comes no responsibility. Admittedly, with his style and how he plays this character, it took a little while for me to get on board with him. He channels a lot of Humphrey Bogart, James Cagney, and Edward G. Robinson. He's been out of the game for a while, and once he starts to get back into the fight, he lands in certain situations pretty awkwardly and is really flimsy whenever he throws a punch. Similar to the likes of Bruce Wayne in Dark Knight Rises when he goes back to being Batman after 8 years, although he's a lot more quick to remember what he did. He's still not fully there. And I personally like it when we see heroes that have been out of their element for some time, like Bruce Wayne in Dark Knight Rises, or Wolverine in Logan. But it's not just his performance that works, it's what they do with him as far as his character backstory. He was a World War I veteran, he was engaged to this woman named Ruby who was killed in an accident by some criminal that he caught, and because he was off doing something irresponsibly, he was too late to save her, and because of all that guilt, he put away the mantle of the Spider. But smartly, the series sums it up in a montage in the pilot episode rather than just giving us one whole episode to focus on what happened. I mean, after a while, the movie's caught on to the idea that we don't need to see Uncle Ben getting killed again, even though I think it's important to acknowledge that, but neither here nor there. In this situation, I think they really sold it on just what exactly this guy has been through. As for other characters, Lamorne Jackson plays Robbie Robertson, this universe's version of Robbie, and he's the opposite of Ben Reilly. Ben is very cynical and pessimistic, whereas Robbie's more optimistic in his pursuit of risky stories in order to get attention and advance his career, which he ends up working at the Daily Bugle at one point, even though he's a freelance journalist. No jobs? Freelance! Best thing in the world for a kid your age. Karen Rodriguez as Janet, Ben's secretary. She's basically, in a way, the comedic bone of the show. Someone who's sarcastic and blunt with Ben, but clearly does care about him deeply. Then there's Lee Jun Lee as Felicia Cat Hardy, who I didn't recognize until I looked up her name. She was the Asian woman from Sinners last year. A more fleshed out portrayal of Felicia Hardy as opposed to when we saw her debut in Amazing Spider-Man 2. I guess you can argue at a certain point she started to steal the spotlight from Nicolas Cage, because she turns out to be not just a femme fatale or a damsel in distress. She's actually not a damsel in distress. Again, spoiler warning if you haven't seen the show, it turns out she was the one plotting to kill Silvermane. All because Silvermane killed her first fiancé, Thomas. Now she's fallen in love with Flint Marko, played by Jack Huston. Hopefully I got that right, who is Silvermane's key enforcer and is slowly starting to turn into sand. Basically this universe's version of Sandman. Jack Huston or Huston, I apologize, I don't know how to say this guy's name. He, along with Nicolas Cage, have some of those faces where they could seamlessly blend into a past era like the 1930s. And to name a few others, Tobey Maguire, Colin Farrell, and Angelina Jolie. And Brendan Gleeson as Silvermane turns out to be a really imposing force of opposition for everybody else. I saw this quote where he described the character as a philosopher with a drone-eye view who's equally dangerous. Brendan Gleeson, to his credit, is able to effectively get that right across the board, in a very different type of intimidation, as opposed to Mad-Eye Moody in Goblet of Fire, which we all remember how that turned out. Abraham Papula plays Lonnie Lincoln, or Tombstone, who I guess you could say now has made his live-action debut. He made his cinematic debut in the Spider-Verse movie, but as far as live-action, this is his first time, and the character's going to show up in Brand New Day pretty soon. And Lonnie, along with Flint Marko, were all soldiers in the First World War, just like Ben Reilly. And as it turns out, they were all being experimented on by this one doctor, and there's one episode that's dedicated to seeing the actual backstory of how this all came to be. Shoot, was it episodes 5 or 6, I don't remember. But we see how Ben got his spider powers when he came across this one prisoner who was turning into a man-spider type of creature. That moment felt like I was watching a body horror movie from the likes of David Cronenberg. He pulls out the blanket and you see half of this guy looking like a spider. No joke, as soon as that happened, I went, ah! And the guy bites Ben on the arm, which therefore transfers the powers of a spider to Ben. Seeing how he twitches and gets all these weird sensations, which we also hear through the dialogue that he had to watch certain movies in order to learn how to be a human again or act human-like. That way he couldn't draw attention from other people. And therefore his superiors in the military experimented on him. Now in this situation, he's being experimented on by Dr. Faber, who was trying to cure all of the ailments or the abilities of all these people that served in the war. And her son, who can physically age rapidly, experiences the cure, but instead of killing him like his mother orders him to, he helps Ben Reilly get out of this situation. I think in any other situation where we would see this kind of interconnectivity and seeing how Flint, Ben, and Lonnie, and Ogden are all connected, it would come off, I guess, in some ways convoluted if it was any lesser screenwriter or creative producer involved, but this all has a point in how it all wraps up. The first couple episodes I was thinking, okay, what's the connection here? If this is going to be some sort of half-ass connection like Amazing Spider-Man did, I'm not going to have any part of this. But no, in this situation it actually makes sense. And how all the trauma from the past of these guys are still haunting them to this day. And I guess you could say the powers that these guys have are the external showcase of what they've been through. Well, thematically anyway. As far as the technical side, aesthetically, and production design, this is all top-notch. Absolutely gorgeous for the eyes. Watching a couple of scenes from online in color, it's not bad. To me, it doesn't feel as strong.
The colors, Duke! The colors!
I'm colorblind, kid.
I know it's just a couple of clips, but I think I could try to watch a full episode in color if I wanted to. But I think the black and white style fits perfectly fine. And it's all part of that unique flavor that the show brings. As far as the action, when we see him chasing the mobsters on the street, how he lands clumsily on the cars, instantly took me right back to when Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker is chasing the carjacker on the street in the middle of Midtown. And at one point in the final episode, he's struggling to fire his webbing out of his wrists, just like Tobey did in Spider-Man 2. And the swinging sequences, while there's not a whole lot, they are impressive beyond all measure, especially for a streaming series. Goes to show you just how far we've come in the world of television, maybe to a point rival what we see from a feature film. I mean, this has been going on for a long time, obviously, in streaming and television, with storytelling, production design, aesthetic, and so on. But for a while, I didn't think it was possible to see live-action Spider-Man swinging in a television-sized budget. After the show, any and all doubts I had are now gone. And one of the first sequences we see is from the first-person perspective of the spider swinging through the city, just like in the first Amazing Spider-Man when he's swinging out in his costume for the first time. And the fight sequences, particularly the final battle between, I guess it's not Electro, I don't know the actual character's name. It's a little sloppy and clumsy, and I know some people would prefer stylized action. And yes, I agree, that is really fun to see. But there is something that's a little extra exciting for me when we see somebody like Spider-Man, who's been out of the element for a while, kind of struggling to fight through a certain situation. And it adds to the humanity and vulnerability of the character. And that to me is most important. If you can hear that sound, don't mind that. That's the nearby firehouse sounding its alarm. Now, Zach Pope, who I've been following for a few years, has said this, and there's probably a few others who have mentioned this too. This is what Sony should have been doing all along, instead of movies like Venom, Morbius, Kraven, and that Madam Web bullshit. I know hindsight's always 20/20, but this could have easily been avoidable. Show, movie, live action, animation, I don't care. I mean, we had the Spider-Verse movies, yes, but this in live action anyway, this is what Sony should have been doing all along. Now, I don't know if there's going to be a second season for this, even though I think it does leave some things open for the future. If there is a possibility of a Spider-Man 2099, Spider-Gwen, or the Scarlet Spider clone saga, I vote for all of those in a microsecond. You can have characters like Venom, Morbius, Madam Web, or Kraven, but don't make them the center focus of a movie or show. If the last 8 years were any indication, nobody gives a shit about that. If this is only a one and done with Spider-Man Noir, okay, I can accept that. But if there is a possibility for season 2, sign me up. It's still a Spider-Man property, but it's a different flavor for people to get into. And it's very much a callback to those gangster films from the 20s, 30s, or 40s, like Maltese Falcon, which Stan Lee said was a huge inspiration for him in regards to the Kingpin. And while it is nice to see an episode released per week, in this situation, I think it was perfectly fine to release all the episodes at once, because it basically gets right to the point and doesn't waste any time focusing on certain areas that you don't need to focus on. Not every episode does end on a cliffhanger, which is actually good, because I, like Ellie said in The Last of Us, hate cliffhangers. But it maintains throughout the show the focus of the meat and potatoes of it all. There's a lot of other stuff I'm not even mentioning, but for time purposes, I'm just going to leave it right there. But Spider-Noir is probably the most unique look at the Spider-Man mythos that I have seen in a long time. I'd probably have to ponder it even further. I really don't have any complaints with this. If you have Amazon Prime, don't miss out on this. So that's all I have for you guys on the show. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what your thoughts are down below in the show if you've seen it. If you'd like to see more from me, just hit the like and subscribe button. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.